I'm going to show you now how to navigate and customize the edit window. When we create a Pro Tools project, this first window that comes up is called our edit window. There are two main windows and the other one's the mix window. I'll show you that just now. If I hold down Command and equals, then we can see the mix window. Now the mix window looks very, very uninspiring at the moment because there's nothing in it. We have no tracks. We've not created any tracks, but we'll do that in a few minutes. So let's just work from left to right across the top of the edit window and have a look at what we've got. The first thing is the edit modes: shuffle, spot, slip and grid. Now for music, the most important ones are arguably slip and grid, and they're the two that I'm going to be showing you more about later on. Shuffle has its uses and spot can be very useful for Foley work. Moving next to those is our zoom functions, and again there's going to be a separate video all about the zoom functions. We can horizontal zoom in and out. You can see the timeline changing there using either of these arrows at the top, and we have 5 preset zoom levels as well that we can actually select ourselves later on. We can also do a vertical zoom on the waveform, and we can zoom in the MIDI information as well. As well as that, in our main tool section here, we have a zoom magnifier. So if we need to zoom in, we can use the zoomer tool there. I'm going to leave each of these individual functions for later on because they're useful editing functions and how the timeline and other bits of Pro Tools works with other bits, if you see what I mean. The most important part of this toolbar is probably these 3 tools. This is called the trim tool, this is the selector tool, and this is the grabber tool. And these are the 3 most important tools for working within trim, selector and grabber, working within Pro Tools. So you can actually join them together to be what's called the smart tool, and we'll come to that later on and how useful that is when we're looking at editing. Then we have the scrubber tool here, and finally the pencil tool. Again, I'll show you the uses of those later on. This is our counter section. Now, you may have started off with your Pro Tools, it might look like that because the counter is set to minutes and seconds. I'm mainly going to be working with music, so I like to have it set with bars and beats. If we're working in Foley, then timecode is possibly the most useful, and you'll see these are actually being highlighted down here as I switch through them. So I'm going to go back to bars and beats, and that's the one that's grayed out along the top. That's an indicator of what counter is actually being utilised. Again, we've got some useful functions here, but I'm going to show you those later on, one by one, and exactly what they do. Then we have grid and nudge parameters. Again, later on, we'll find out what they do in the edit modes and when we want to actually utilize those. Apart from the zoom functions and the edit functions, in this window, probably the transport functions are the most important ones. This transport doesn't necessarily come up by default. A lot of the time you have to open the transport. So the transport might not be open, and some people panic and say, oh, I can't see the transport. We just have to open that little disclosure area and create and make the transport open. So that's the transport on the top transport bar of the edit page. We can also go to the window menu and select transport and get a floating transport, which is almost identical to that one. The transport carries those transport functions that are really important. Play and record are the most important ones. Stop, rewind, fast forward, go to the end, and go to the beginning. This is a synchronization button. If we're going to create a count off, if we want to say 2 bars of a count off, then we have to open up the MIDI controls, and that will let us enable the count off, which is currently set to 2 bars. And that will give 2 bars count in before we start recording or playing. There's also other conductor and tempo functions in here which are going to become very important. That transport can be positioned anywhere on the screen, either the mix window, or just Command equals back to the mix window. It will always float there and be at the front of any screen that we have on the page. Here we have our timeline information. So the timeline here, we have, currently we're displaying bars and beats, minutes and seconds, timecode, samples, tempo, meter, all of these things. We don't need them all. Again, if I'm working in music, I might just want bars and beats, in which case this icon here lets me get rid of timecode, lets me get rid of minutes and seconds, lets me get rid of samples, and if I wanted to, I could get rid of markers, tempo and meter at the same time, but actually they're going to be very useful for me when I'm recording music. This element here, this is my track display window. Now I'm going to create a couple of tracks. just double click there. We'll create new tracks. These are creating stereo audio tracks, and we'll come to why that's not the best way of creating tracks later on. But when my tracks are displayed here, I'm displaying the track information, the insert information, and the input-output information. Now again, I can customize that with this little icon here. So if I don't want the inserts, we can close the inserts. If I don't want the I/O information and other things that we can put up here, we can open all of these and make way too much information on the screen at any one time. Okay, that's just too much. And obviously that's taking up an awful lot of screen with just all that track information. So we can shut that down. We can open that up when we need it, and we can shut it down when we don't need it. I have to say the things I like most up all the time are the inserts, the A to E inserts, and the I/O information. This we can't get rid of. We can change the track color here as well by double clicking on it and selecting a different color. By default, audio tracks will be blue, instrument tracks will be that kind of gold color, master tracks will be red, auxiliary tracks will be green, but we'll see that as we come back to it later on. So that's how to navigate the edit window, and we'll look at a few other things more track oriented in the next video.